Hello, welcome. Thank you for coming to the presentation. Yeah. So before I jump into anything, well, you're here to learn about Drupal 8 and Symfony 2 and why it's not that scary, and why you are going to enjoy working with Drupal 8 more than Drupal 7. And it's basically going to be a kindergarten vocabulary review lesson of there's all these scary words you've probably seen thrown around if you've read any blog posts about Drupal 8 or if you looked into Symfony. And if you're like me, even though I have a programming background, I was completely intimidated by a lot of the words. I didn't know what they were. So my name is Derek DeRaps. I work at MediaCurrent. I'm a senior Drupal developer, and I have no social media accounts except for Drupal.org, if you count that. I am not an expert on Drupal 8. I have built 0 client websites on Drupal 8. MediaCurrent has built at least 1, if not 2, client sites on Drupal 8 at this point, and launched at least one of them, fairly large. And it's been successful. And so I've learned a little bit from those guys, and also I've been fortunate enough to go to a couple trainings on Drupal 8, at least 2 or 3 of them now. Some more from a Symfony perspective and some more from a Drupal 8 perspective. So it's really good to know the underpinnings, like with anything. It's good to know what underlies it. So it's really good to understand Symfony and how that works, and it's going to help you get integrated with Drupal 8. So MediaCurrent makes me put this slide up, so read it, enjoy it, absorb it, learn about what we do. And if there are any clients in the room, please come talk to us. And these are some of our clients. I'm lead for Habitat for Humanity. I've worked on Georgia Public Broadcasting and that one. a little bit of time. And some other ones that are not listed up there. Emory, one of their small sites, a Georgia Tech intranet. A little bit of background there. I went to Georgia Tech, graduated in 2008 with a degree in computer science, and really thought I was going to go save the world and be an ecologist and a scientist and all that stuff. And then I got dragged. I did not want to come back into the field. I got dragged back into the field and then discovered Drupal, and that really became my passion. So here I am. Okay, so if you want to follow along with the actual slides, it's a different presentation from this. So you go to slides.com/myname/D8. And let's do that. Okay, so yes, so today we're going to talk about, we'll start with the demo, right? Because I have 2 live demos, and I figure at least one of them is going to go wrong, so I didn't want them to be like right next to each other. So we'll do one first, and then we'll do the vocabulary lesson, and then we'll do another kind of hands-on coding practice that uses a lot of the things we're going to talk about in the vocabulary lesson. So to start off, I want to show you about the Drupal Console, and also about using Drush with Drupal 8. Raise your hand if you have installed a, what? What have you installed? I didn't even say what it was. Installed a module inside the space station. Installed a Drupal 8 site running locally or anywhere else. Okay, great. So you all probably know about as much as I do. How many folks have used Drush with Drupal 8? Okay, how many folks have used Drush 7 with Drupal 8? Yeah, before it became deprecated, right? So we used to be able to use Drush 7. Now we have to use Drush 8. So yeah, Drush 7 is now the latest stable release, the 7x branch, and that works with 6, 7, maybe 5, I don't know. So that works with all versions. And it's great because before it was really confusing. You'd have to tell people, okay, we're installing Drupal 8, but you need to use Drush 7. And that, works with Drupal 8, but does some weird things with Drupal 6. And so now it's, Drush 8, Drupal 8, a little bit more clear. How many of you installed Drush 8 via Composer? Okay, a few less people. So we're going to get into Composer a little bit because that's going to be an important tool to learn for Drupal 8. It's a dependency management tool, basically loading libraries and things like that. It can also be used to manage applications on your, if you're using a Mac, on your Mac. I don't know if it does anything with Windows, maybe. And then the Drupal Console. Does anyone know what the Drupal Console is? 50-50. Okay. All right, space station dude. All right, so let's blow this up a little bit here. So, why is everything so tiny? I already blew it up. It's the wrong resolution. Bear with me just a moment. This is going to be really hard if I don't fix. Oh my gosh. Big resolution. Yeah, it's not supposed to be that resolution. No. Yes, there we go. The text isn't actually that big. It's just because I had to blow it up so much before. So that's actually the right resolution, I think, for it. Okay, so we are looking at a terminal. Some of you might recognize. And I've got a site here. Well, first of all, I'm going to show you the Drupal console. So if you go to, I think it's drupalconsole.org, you'll see how to install it. You can install it. They've got a little script you can run. It's very easy. And to use it, you simply type Drupal, and you get a little bit of output there. To see what you can do with it, you run Drupal list, and that lists all the commands. So right here, you can see there really isn't that much we can do. That's telling you how to use it, and these are all the available commands. And there really isn't a whole lot you can do. You can download a module, you can install a site, and do a few, I don't know why, YAML diffs and things like that. If you've ever used it before, you'll know that when you're actually inside of a working site, you have a lot more going on. So let's go ahead and take a look at that. So what did I call the site? D8. Well, let's actually leave it there. Okay, so now we'll run. So now we're in Drupal, the Drupal repository. I've checked out release candidate 1, which everyone is super excited about, right? All right, so now we'll probably get the same list of commands because this website has not been installed yet. So basically the list looks the same. I wanted to show you how many people are used to installing a Drupal site with Drush site install. Yeah, it's pretty common. It's really easy for just throwing up new sites or for installing a client site from a profile, something like that. So with Drush, when you're installing a site, you have to do a lot of, you guys probably can't see that in the back, can you? I'll get it to go up a little bit, whatever. So you have to install, you have to use all those parameters, right? You have to use the database URL, the admin username and password, things like that. With the Drupal console, it's quite a bit easier. We just do Drupal site install. And it asks us all the questions and gives us a nice, even autocomplete form for selecting the parameters when we're installing it. Asks us about the database. Boom. And now it's going to install a site for us. It's pretty quick, actually. I did it this morning. So I'll go ahead and take a look, see what that looks like.
Does this database have to exist already, or did it create it?
That's a good question. I already had it created ahead of time. Oh, right, I might have dropped it. I think it would create it if you give it root credentials.
Okay.
Okay, so this was the site. So let's take a look at it here. And it's not done yet. Oh, I moved the code. So let's see. Of course, I was moving things around right before the presentation, and that was always a brilliant idea. Okay, sorry about that, folks. Of course, I should have just left it alone, but no, I had to. It's like, oh, I want this in the DCATL folder, so it'll be easier to. No. Okay. Yeah, like I was saying, Drupal 8, the Drupal console can install the site for you. It can also clear caches for you. So if we go to there, we run Drupal. Can anyone tell me what the command is to clear caches in Drupal 8? Well, it's drush cr, which stands for cache rebuild. So cache rebuild. So it's a little bit more verbose with the Drupal console, but it does the same thing. And now when we run Drupal list, we'll see a whole lot more going on. So we've got views debug. We've got, so you can run various actions on the user. What are some other really good ones? Router debug is really useful. It tells you about all the lists, or it gives you a list of all of the routes on the site, which is really helpful when you're trying to debug certain pages on your site. And then, of course, the usual things like downloading modules, installing them. And this is something that is probably going to be the most useful, because all that other stuff, you can do that with, most all that stuff you can do with Drush. One thing that Drush doesn't do right now is scaffolding, building out the code for you. And one downside to the Symfony approach and object-oriented and all of the things that we're doing differently in Drupal 8 is that it's very verbose, meaning you have to have a lot more code to accomplish the same thing. And there's huge benefits to that, right? There's good reasons why we are changing to this approach, but there are a lot more files and a lot more code needed. You have to create classes just to, create a new route, right? Whereas before it was one function. You implement hook menu, boom, you're done. Now we have to have a whole new file with a class defined and a specific method. Actually, it takes two files because you need a routing file which defines the route, and then the controller which actually produces the page. So what we can use is generate to scaffold out all of that code for us. So let's go ahead and scaffold out I didn't test this ahead of time, so it's a little bit dicey, but let's go ahead and try it. So everything else is working so good so far. Let's generate where is it? Can anyone help me out? You see route? Let's do module first. Okay, so we can generate a module. So we just give it its name. Yep. And remember that in Drupal 8, the modules can go directly in the modules directory. No more sites all modules. You can still use that if you want. It still works, but we don't have to do that anymore. Yes, I like that name. No, that's new. I didn't do that last time. We're not going to worry about Composer right now. We have no dependencies. Yeah, so that takes care of building out the module file for us, the info file, which is now defined using YAML. We'll get to that in a little bit about what YAML is. And let's see. Now let's try list. Do we see controller on there? Router. No. Generate controller. There we go. All right, so module name is DCATL. And see, it was auto-completing that for us. How cool is that? We'll use default controller. Controller title is make a page. So inside of your controller class, you actually define the method that produces the markup. So it would be the page callback. And again, we're going to get into some more of this in a minute. Can anyone tell me what the difference is between a method and a function? There's just one thing. A method is a function inside of a class. That's the only difference. Why they have different names, I don't really know, but semantics. So the action method is just the page callback that's going to be used to actually create the markup. And so what do we want this path to be? We'll just call it DCATL. No. We can build unit tests in there. We don't need any services at this moment. Yes. Okay, so now if we go inside of modules DCATL, custom DCATL. So we've got our module file everyone's familiar with. What's going to be inside there? 0. Like right now it's going to be totally empty. We've got our info file everyone's familiar with. Routing is a new one. So routing is what, like I was saying, it requires 2 files now to just create a page. Routing is where we're going to define the paths that our module is going to define. And then source is our namespace directory. So that's where we put all of the controllers, services, all of the different objects we're going to be creating go in there. Except there's okay, yeah, so inside source, we'll see, I'll show you, we've got just the controller directory, I think, or is that the actual class? Yeah, so directory and then default controller. The name of the file always corresponds with the name of the class. Oh, I meant to say. All right, so this was all generated for us. Didn't have to do anything. So we've got the namespace defined there for us. We'll get into namespacing again in a little bit. We depend on the controller base class because that's what Drupal uses that's what we have to extend. That's got all of the most of the logic in it, and we just extend off that to build our page. If you're familiar with object-oriented programming, that probably makes sense. If you're not familiar, definitely get a little primer. Find a little something off the internet to teach you about OO. It's really not that complicated. And this is our callback, our page callback index. So notice we're returning a render array here. We can return straight markup, or we can return a render array. In this case, it's a render array with some text translated to say that we're implementing this method. Okay, and since the site isn't working, I can't show you this on the page. But that's, I think, enough for the Drupal console right now. Any other questions? Yeah?
Does it create the folder structure for the namespace to work?
It does.
Because the namespace needs a specific folder structure to work, right?
It does. Yeah, that's a great question. And actually, save it that for a moment. We're going to get into namespacing during the next part of the presentation, and we'll talk exactly about how that works. Any other questions about the console? Yes?
When you generate the module, there is an option ask you if you want to compose a .json.
Yes.
If you choose no. If you choose yes, what happens?
If you choose yes, it's going to basically create a blank composer.json and probably a blank composer.lock file.
And what it will be used in the future? That's something I don't know.
Sure. And again, this is my brilliant idea to do this code portion first before the rest of the presentation. We'll get into that in a moment, and we'll talk about Composer and what we can do with it and why we use it.
Okay.
So all good questions. All right, so let's see here. Back to this one. Okay, so now let's jump into the vocabulary lesson, starting with routes and controllers. We already talked about them a little bit, so you saw what it looks like. What is a route? A route is simply another version of hook menu. Hook menu defined we didn't call it that in Drupal 7, but hook menu defined the routes that your module was going to implement. So yourdomain.com/foobar, that's a route. And in the Symfony world and in the Drupal 8 world, we're using YAML to define that. Can anyone tell me what YAML stands for? Yes, that, and also it's I forget what you call that. It's like a recursive name for itself. YAML ain't a markup language. So yeah, here's an example, a very teeny tiny example, which you definitely can't read, of hook menu. And it implements a page callback. Over here, we're defining the route. This was in that routing.yaml file we saw before. It defines a route which has a machine name associated with it in addition to having the actual path. And the inside of the rest of that definition, we define the callback, which means default controller is the class name, and today in history is the method. So if you can read that. Oops, down. Okay, the controller is just the page callback. Controller is that's it, for us. That's what the controller is going to do. You know, there's MVC frameworks out there, and C stands for controller. If for us, for our purposes, the controller is just a page callback that returns the markup. You could use it for all your pages, right? You could have the same controller with different functions in it, or different methods inside of it that are used for each of your different routes. So in this case, we've got the class definition and then the method inside of it, which takes arguments, just like your page callback would in Drupal 7, takes maybe the node argument or anything else, and does all of the magic you need to do to output markup on the page. Okay, so controllers are the same thing as callbacks. They do whatever you need them to do to return the markup and render arrays. How many of you are familiar with Symfony2 at all? Like, you're more from the Symfony side. Okay, so in Symfony2, it's a little bit, the way Drupal does it is a little bit different. What would Symfony2 return from a callback, the route callback? It would return an actual response object. And that's something good to know about in the Drupal world because we will be interacting with the response object from time to time. Symfony2 also supports like sort of alternate page rendering pipelines, and so Drupal is actually using the non-standard rendering pipeline. We implemented our own to allow us to return render arrays because imagine that the rest of the PHP world doesn't use render arrays to create markup. So inside of a controller, what are some of the things that you're going to need to do? You need to sanitize text, you're going to have to create links, you're going to need to log messages, query the database for maybe some information on your nodes or other entities. And they depend on services provided by these different functions. So TL, watchdog, DB query, DB insert. Without those functions, our controllers aren't going to be able to do much except output HTML, which defeats the purpose of having a controller. We need dynamic things. So one of the problems, though, is, as many of you probably know, we don't have access to a lot of those old functions like T and L and all those, those workhorses of our day in, day out work. They were removed and replaced. So how are we going to do our work without access to those functions? Well, that's where we're going to jump into sort of object-oriented lesson here real quick. There are two types of objects in the sort of general world of object-oriented programming. There are action objects, action classes, and data classes. Can anyone give me an example of a data class? Drupal 7, whatever. Drupal 6 even. What's a class that its only purpose is to just hold information? Doesn't perform any logic. All it does is hold some data for us. Stores it in the database. You can create bundles of it. Entity. There we go. Sweet. So that's an example of it. Really does very little logic. It does. There are some blurred lines, like it has methods for saving an entity and different things like that, loading the entity. But mostly all of its functions, all of its methods are going to be around saving and manipulating that data. There are also action classes, action objects. And can anyone give me an example of what an action class or object might be, where it's not meant to hold data. Its sole purpose is to provide tools for us to work with. Authenticate. That could be. I don't even know exactly which class that would be used in, but like, for example, a mailer class perhaps would be a good example. Because it's really not meant to hold any data for us. We call it the devel mailer class, for example, to output our test. If we're testing email, that will output all of our email into an actual file for us to use. So that's an example of just an action class. In Drupal 8, there's a general word for that, and that's services. Right? So some class, some object that performs actions for us is called a service. So when I was first learning about Drupal 8 and Symfony, there's like services, there's the service container, there's dependency injection, and it was all really super confusing. And all services it's just a class that does stuff for us that we need to do. So It's a useful object. It's a collection of related methods to accomplish some series of tasks. So how do we use it? Well, we know that in order for our controllers to be able to do what we need to do, like translate text, sanitize it, create links, access the database, we need access to those functions that no longer exist. So we need access to these services that perform those tasks for us. So enter the service container. The service container is literally just a giant bag. I forget what the technical data term is for it, like some sort of hash, but it's a giant bag of all of the services, all of the useful objects that we need to do our job are stuffed inside of it. So we've got this one central place where we can get access to all of the services we need. So you might be thinking, well, that solves the problem for us. We just, anytime we need to translate something or create a link, we reach into the bag, fish around for the one we want, pull it out, and do our business. Well, you can do that, and there's definitely going to be a lot of that going on in Drupal and in the contrib world. People are going to be doing that, and there's times when it makes sense to do that. But the best way, the proper way to do that, and what we're leading towards here is something called dependency injection, is that we don't want to reach into the bag and grab the exact class that we want. Why wouldn't we want to do that? Why wouldn't we want to grab it? Say I'm writing a module that sends some email, right? So I reach into the bag and I grab the send mail class. Why might that be a problem?
Class and object-oriented programming doesn't work that way. You want to grab into, say, almost like an abstract class and then get a class derived off that.
Exactly right. Exactly right. So I want someone else to define which class I'm going to get access to, right? Because maybe in production, yeah, send mail class is exactly what we want to use. But in development, we don't want send mail. We want the devel mail module or something else that's not actually going to send mail, but allow us to view it, log it, something like that. Now, you could just have an if statement, right? If environment equals some random dev variable you set on your server, then use this class, otherwise use that. But that's really old school. I hope everyone knows that's a bad idea. So what we want to do is we want to pass in a general idea of what type of service we need, and then the system or the environment will define what class, what object fulfills that need. So inside of our controller, we have a method called create. Create receives the service container. So that's the only place in our controller that we should be accessing the service containers inside of the create method. From that point, that's where we can fish around in there, specify loosely what we want, right? We want a mailer class. Right, so we grab the mailer class, which isn't actually an object itself. It's just an interface that other objects are going to implement. We provide those access to our class. We save those into our class, and then we can use them later on in all of our page callbacks. And there's a couple really good reasons for doing that. So what we just did is called dependency injection. So that's passing in. So our controller depends on these other services. And what we just did was pass those in so that our entire controller, all of the page callbacks, all of the different functions in there, can use the same exact services, rather than each controller reaching in, fishing around for the exact one it wants, pulling it out, and using it. We've now just passed them in one time to our controller, and everything inside that controller is going to be using the same object that was defined somewhere else, right? We just said we want to be able to mail stuff, or we want to be able to log stuff. And maybe in development, it's okay to have database logging going on, right? But in production, maybe not. You might not want so much logging going directly into the database. That might be a performance issue. So it's really handy to follow this design pattern. And it's just a pattern. There's nothing enforcing it. There's nothing telling you have to do it this way. But it's going to become part of the coding standards, I imagine, for Drupal 8. Eventually, people are going to be, just like in Drupal 7, we've got coding standards. In Drupal 8, we're going to be defining, it may not be exactly the way I'm outlining it here, but something like this for making sure all of our contrib space is accessing the service container in the right way. So we already talked about this a little bit. Why did we go through this hassle? Why not query it directly and get access to it right when we need it? Well, you can, like I said, but it's not the best practice. The other really big benefit here is that by explicitly defining, before runtime, everything on which your class depends, it provides a nice, handy way for code analyzers like IDEs. If anyone has used PHP Storm, they can then know at that point exactly which classes your controller depends on. And so you can just query for everything that is using the logger class. And you have access to it everywhere, and you can change it in one spot or in one go. If you don't have that defined explicitly somewhere, then you're kind of just left. Like maybe there's a security issue with some library you were working with, and you need to replace it or just remove it. Without explicitly declaring everywhere it's used, then you just kind of have to grep through the code base and try to, figure out what the right string is to find and make sure you clean it up manually. So there's a lot of good reasons why this helps us. So in Drupal 7, we already did some dependency injection. We just didn't know it. Like I was talking about with Mailer, if anyone is familiar with swapping it out in your settings.php, this is one way to do that is we set the default system for the mail system to whatever we want. And a lot of times, one of the ways that we like to do that is we'll have separate settings files, version-controlled settings files for each of our environments, dev, test, prod, local. And we'll go ahead and specify this in that settings file. So on dev and local, it's using developmail.log, and on prod, it's actually going to use sendmail. Same thing with caching. If anyone has set up memcache or Redis, you have to replace the default cache class with the appropriate one for that system. Okay. Almost done with the vocabulary lesson. Any questions so far on all that stuff? Yes?
Like you said at the beginning of the session, you did a couple of sites in the Drupal 8.
Yes.
So with so much of difference between Drupal 7 and the current community modules, how they are going to transfer to this styling or this way of what is going to happen?
There are some really good videos out there on taking a module from Drupal 7 to Drupal 8. So it's going to be part of the work of the community to take all of our modules and port them to Drupal 8. So it looks very different, and the code is significantly different. But once you get used to building out pages with controllers and get used to the object-oriented approach, there are actually some modules where there's actually an automatic upgrader that will search. If you got some module you wrote, you can pass it in, and it will attempt to replace everything that doesn't exist in Drupal 8 with the proper Drupal 8 function. Like everywhere you've used T, it'll replace it with the proper call to your controller to translate it, and links and everything like that. So yes, it's going to take some work is really the only answer. Anything else? Okay, so final little bit of review here is we already talked about the Drupal console and some of the things that we can do with it. Oh, this is a really useful one as well. We talked about the service container, right? One thing you can do with the Drupal console is debug a lot of these different things we have access to, and the service container is one of them. So you can query the service container and see all of those useful objects that are in there. So you're like, oh man, what's the name of that logger class again? Or how do I get access to some random service? That's a good way to do it. Okay, so someone was asking about Composer before. So if you haven't installed Composer yet, I would recommend going to getcomposer.org and installing it. They've got some nice instructions there. And then try installing Drush. One caveat is if you already have Drush installed, they're going to conflict. So what I've done on my local is I have Drush installed via Homebrew on my Mac, and then I also have Drush installed via Composer. Now with Homebrew, I've got the latest stable version, Drush 7. With Composer, I have it installed the latest snapshot from master, or from develop. Yeah, dev master, which is an interesting branch name. But so what you can do is just rename. There's a lot of different ways you can do it. You can just rename that binary that Composer gets for you. It's going to be called Drush by default. I rename mine to Drush Dev. So when I'm working with Drupal 8 sites, I just say Drush Dev CR or whatever I need to do. Okay, so what does Composer do? It basically, I mean, one way to look at it is that it replaces the functionality of the libraries module. Libraries module is a pretty common one to use on most sites. It just provides a little bit of an API to make it easier to load libraries. Typically, those files would be, the library files would be downloaded by you and placed into sites all libraries and committed to the project. Now, that's kind of an old school way to do it. Ideally, we wouldn't have external libraries saved into our own project, right? Because those libraries exist elsewhere, and they're going to be getting updated and modified. And we don't want someone else's source code as part of our project. So that's where Composer comes in. It allows us to define what libraries and projects our project depends on. And it's a very simple way for everyone else who's working with us to get access to those, to make sure everyone is working on the same version of those libraries. So when you first start on a project, you're going to run composer install. That's going to read the composer.json that we talked about and read all the dependency information. And it's going to install the libraries that you need at the specific version that's specified in the composer.json. And actually, I misspoke a little bit there. It's not going to read the composer.json. What file is it going to read in order to install dependencies? Composer.lock, exactly. So a composer.lock is the defined version of what everyone needs to be using. Composer.json is what you update when you want to, say, change the version of some dependency or add a dependency. Then when you run composer update, it's going to regenerate the lock file. And then everyone who pulls in your code is going to get the updated lock file. Run composer install, they'll get the new versions. So you can also update just one project inside of a composer.json. Let's say our project depended on Symfony. We could run a composer update, Symfony. What that would do is it would first update the composer.json file, and then recompile the composer.lock to have the specific version. For adding a dependency, we use composer require. That adds a dependency to the project. And I also wanted to cover real quick the difference between a star and a tilde, other than one being squiggly and one being a star. 2.6.star, what does that do? What would that, if I had a dependency on send mail 2.6.star, don't go to sleep. Yeah, so if I have, so let's say I've got version 2.6.1 already installed in my project, because I've already had that previously for some reason, and someone, and then when the next time I run composer install, it sees a 2.6.9 has been released. What's going to happen at that point? Nothing's going to happen. Because of that star, I've already got 2.6.1 installed. Even though a new version was released, it's not going to do anything. By the way, where does it get all of its data for the packages and libraries? Packages.org. Yeah, packages.org is the central repository for all of the composer libraries, or all of the, yeah. Okay, so now the tilde, any idea what the tilde might do? At least, exactly. So it's the same thing as a star, except at least this number. So if I've got 2.6.1 installed locally, and someone adds this to the composer file, it's going to say, I don't have at least that version, so I need to go ahead and install. Now it's going to talk to the packages.org and see there's a 2.6.9. So which version is it going to get? .2 or .9? .9. Because it's at least. It's at least .2, right? So it's going to get, if it talks to composer or packages.org and sees there's a .9, that's still valid. So it's going to grab that.
Will the 2.6 star update if there was a 2.7?
if there was a 2.7, if I was on 2.7.
So you would have to have 2.7 in there for it to do anything. I'm just saying if you had 2.6 star and then 2.7 comes out, what would it do?
Depends on what I had installed locally. Like I said, if I've already got a version installed of 2.6. whatever, it's not going to do anything. It's only going to take an action if it fails this check. So if I've already got some version of 2.6, doesn't matter what version comes out, it's not going to do anything. The only reason it did something here was because someone, I had 2.6.1 installed from some earlier, dependency, and then someone upped it to this. So I failed that check. It's got to go talk to the server and try and get a newer version.
And without either one of those, it gets set to the net version.
You have to specify a version. Oh yeah, if you just put that.
2.6.0.
Yes, exactly. It'll just get, it requires that specific. And if you have 2.6.5, it's going to downgrade you to that version.
So if you've got 2.6.star and you have not run the install yet, it'll grab whatever the latest.
Correct.
It'll grab it anyways if it's a fresh install. It'll go for it.
Yes, right. If it's a fresh install, it's going to grab, 2.6.9.
Something in passing though, that's what's good about it. If you go to like 2.6.3 and it's broken, if you change that file back to 2.6.2, it'll downgrade you back to where you were.
Yep, correct.
That's really nice.
Yeah, it is. Yeah. Okay, one thing to just keep in mind is don't accidentally run Composer Update, because that's going to change the dependencies for everyone else working on the project. The only time you run Composer Update is when you've manually edited or if you've somehow changed the composer.json file and you specifically want everyone else to change versions. That's when you run Composer Update, because that's going to regenerate the log file. For day in, day out developing, you're only going to run Composer install. Okay, and then someone else was asking about namespaces and autoloading. They make our lives easier. Can anyone tell me what is the standard that the PHP community uses to define namespaces and autoloading?
PSR4.
PSR4, exactly. And what was the earlier one?
PSR0.
PSR0, exactly. What does PSR stand for?
PHP standard recommendation.
Very good. I like this. I didn't actually know the answer to that. I was like, oh crap, why did I ask that question? I was going to say like proposal for something. Sometimes I make stuff up, and fortunately no one's in here telling me that I'm saying things wrong. But so, although Jason probably has heard lots of things, and he's just like, oh, I'll be nice and not heckle you because I asked for that. Okay, so namespaces and autoloading. It is a standard way for the PHP community at large to interact with each other and to load libraries that other people have created. It's not anything that's required, it's just a standard. And there are various ways of implementing that standard. And so let's just talk about how it's going to work in Drupal 8. So in Drupal 8, your namespace, which basically just defines where your code lives and tells if some other project needs to use your code, they're going to take your namespace and say, hey, I need access to this namespace. And then it knows automatically where to find your code. Rather than specifying the exact place on disk, it's going to just be able to load it automatically. Okay, so in Drupal 8, your namespace is always going to start with Drupal. Sorry if this is so small here. Then it's going to start with your module name. So custom module, contrib module, whatever. It's going to be Drupal module name. And then where is it going to go on disk? I mean, it's pretty clear from there. Drupal Muffin Labs, that's going to look in the Muffin Labs module directory. Where's it going to go from there to get the next level down?
I remember right.
What's that? No, we're already inside the modules directory. Yeah, we're already inside the Muffin Labs module directory. Source, exactly. So so from there, this is just by convention. So by convention, it starts with Drupal, then it goes into your module's name, into its directory, and then it looks inside the source directory for everything else in your namespace. So if we go back to, let's just look at this one here. So we've got, this is the root directory, we've got the custom modules directory, we've got my module here named Muffin Labs, and then we have the source directory. And this is where the next level starts. So you can see the namespace here is Drupal, Muffin Labs, then it goes into source just by convention and looks in here. And so I created a controller directory, which doesn't mean anything special. I could call it foobar or whatever I want. And then inside there is where I'm defining this class, the controller, default controller class. Any other questions about that? And before you use any external, any class or anything from a, any other dependency, any other class that you want to use, any service, you have to manually define at the top the namespace that it uses so it knows where to find it. So if I want to use, for example, the controller base, if I just specify that class name, it doesn't know where to find that because there could be 4 different controller base classes defined in different modules. I need to specify exactly which one I want to use, which is Drupal inside the core directory, the controller folder, controller base.php. The class name always corresponds with the file name. So 1 file per class, and they're the same, .php. Any other questions on that? Okay, so what time is it? 5. Okay, I've got till 5:20 or something. Okay, so we will skip the demo if you want. Darn! Actually, this one actually works, unfortunately. I mean, not unfortunately, but it was going to be a cooler demo than the other one. But so let me just show you real quick what this looks like. This is a Today in History page. So wait, this is what? Yeah. What did I just do? This is actually running beta 9. I made this site a while ago, and this is a nice little block overlaying what's supposed to be there, I think, because it's too small. It's a nice responsive theme, guys. Look at that. The block jumped right on top. So this talks to it. So it basically was an example from one of my tutorials that I really like showing because it uses the service container. It grabs them in my create method. I create my own service, declare that in services.yaml. So whatever services your module is going to define, you put that in services.yaml, just like you had routing.yaml. And then we load the Guzzle HTTP library to talk to muffinlabs.org or .com or something, and you get today in history, like the Battle of Wattinginus ends in a French victory. So it just basically goes out and grabs this this data exposed via a REST endpoint. We created a template file, we used Twig, and all that stuff we just don't have time to go into. But if you want more information on this, I'd be happy to talk to you about it. And the source code is available up here. Yeah, in that little tiny link. But you can find this. No. I mean, you can just go there. Just go to director/D8. Or write that down really fast. So I have till 5:20, right? That's it? Okay, so questions? You know, go back to your seat in the back. I thought it was going to be overflowing. I was a little bit overzealous. So yes, any questions on all of that? Yeah.
Security issues and the pluses with Drupal 8. That's the reason why we're fighting to get there. 7 instead of staying in 7.
What? Security? It's super secure. I don't.
B2 of their HTTP request to the Drupal.
Oh yeah, right. We're outsourcing all kinds of code, which is just awesome. Yeah. So let someone else who. Like, I love using the discuss module rather than Drupal comments, right? Why? Because discuss does it really good. You know, ours is fine, but we don't have to worry about configuring it and making it look sexy and all that stuff. Let someone else who does it really well do it well. So that's kind of the philosophy there, I think, using Symfony.
Back to the console thing, you were running something that you could do in Drush. Is there a benefit to doing that?
No, there's just overlap. And there's been some debate, like, is it going to replace Drush and stuff like that? And right now the answer is no. They both exist. When I can do things in the console, I kind of prefer it. It's just prettier. It has colors and stuff, and it auto-completes stuff, and I don't have to pass in options. But
Drush Composer, I'm going to try it.
Yeah. So definitely, if you haven't used Composer or Drush 8, try installing it via Composer. You'll get a feel for using Composer system-wide to manage projects. Yes?
Any reason for using Drupal with Twig as opposed to using Drupal headless?
Oh, that's an entirely different debate, and I will take issue with the word headless. Yes, yeah, so decoupled, yes, exactly, because headless is a little bit, although I did think of a great geeky Halloween costume the other day. So, yeah, I'm a huge fan of decoupling just because I get to use Node, and Node is sexy, and blah, blah, blah. But there are some really cool projects out there. One of them is he's using Meteor.js. So there's kind of two really solid approaches out there that I'm aware of where a lot of things are already done for you, and you don't have to start from scratch. There is the Meteor.js implementation by Schropp. Schropp is his name. So and there's a module for it. Digital site. So this was a presentation he gave recently in Asheville. It was really good. So basically, he has created a module to help integrate Meteor.js, which is a Node framework, as a front end, and it uses Mongo on the back end to store data, and he's got a Node server running next to Drupal, and then a Node server running Meteor. So it's actually two Node servers, and they use this really neat, like basically all the data is replicated in Mongo. So if Drupal goes down, no big deal. It's really nice. Versus a more standard decoupled approach, which is using a REST server. REST services are built into Drupal 8, which is great, useful. And if you want some more info on that, I would look at 4Kitchens. They've got a really neat approach, and they have a module, I think, or install profile or something that helps you get started with using Express.js and not handlebars, Dust templates for templating. And for really simple sites, a lot of times it makes sense. Drupal's great at content. Use Drupal for the editorial experience. Use, again, something that's great at front end for the front end, right? Drupal does front end, does it great, but it takes more knowledge. It's generally more expensive development and more time and a more expertise to get it done. All right. Oh yeah, go ahead.
Aside from the Drupal console, is there a module or feature that has made your development more efficient for Drupal 8?
Yeah, unfortunately, PHP Storm. I'm a Vim guy, and by God, I think I have to start using PHP Storm for Drupal 8. It's an IDE, and it just knows it's so freaking intelligent. It makes. That's really annoying, actually. I have it turned on, but I think I'm going to turn it off because it's a little quirky. So yeah, that's probably the biggest thing because you can click if you're trying to figure out what this class does, you can click on it, and it takes you to the source file, and you can see everything. There's some things in Vim that will allow you to do things like that, but it just takes so long to get that stuff working. So also, it's great for Xdebug integration. PHP Storm has a great Xdebug client.
So you've got Drush, and everybody loves Drush.
Sure.
What caused somebody to say, let's do a
Great
separate
question.
system and have the Drupal console too?
Great question. Yeah, no, absolutely. So Symfony has the app console. This is just a port of the app console. Yep. So a lot of that stuff, like the debugging routes and the debugging all that stuff, is just straight from Symfony. And they added in some things like site install, and they got a little fancy with it. I don't know why.
More versatile.
Sure.
From what I saw here, it's way more versatile than what I can do with Composer and Drush, as far as installing core files.
Mm-hmm. Cool. Yes.
You mentioned some training before. What trainings do you recommend for people?
Well, if you're going to it won't be a con for a while, but that's where I've done my trainings were at, let's see, I did honestly, I don't know. All mine were in person, and one was with like one of the maintainers of Symfony, so that was really interesting. That's where I got a lot of this stuff. As far as online, I build a module, I know, has some great Drupal 8 resources. Oh wait, Media Current actually has a great blog post series on Drupal 8. As for actual trainings, all mine were done in person at either camps or cons or like special events. So, yeah. All right, cool. Thanks, guys. Thank you, Jason, for not heckling.